Hello, friends. This is Darren Hayes of PigskinDispatch.com. Before we take you to your favorite Sports History Network show, just want to tell you a little bit about some merch that you can pick up that represents your favorite SHN podcast. So far, there's t-shirts, coffee mugs, and even books from some of the authors that do podcasts right here on SHN. Who could buy something better than that, than have the history right from the gentleman that you hear talking about it? But we also are adding things each and every day. And where's that store, may you ask? Well, it's at SportsHistoryNetwork.com. Up at the top, there is the SHN merch button. Click on that, it'll take you right to the store, and you can be representing your favorite podcast and show the world that, hey, on the swag that I'm using, it's the headquarters of sports yesteryear, Sports History Network, and my favorite podcaster, the Sports History Network store. Shop there today.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. Way back in 1906, a short film called Humorous Phases of Funny Faces was released and is widely considered by many historians as the first ever animated cartoon. Whether it's truly the first one or the oldest one to be uncovered that's still in existence may be argued for many years to come. However, there is some correlation here to football, because this is the same year where people watching the gridiron were no doubt going through those humorous phases of the funny faces, and it all revolved around the forward pass.
Welcome to the Football History Dude Podcast, where each episode is a journey back in time to learn about the rich history of the NFL. Your host is Arnie Chapman. Football is his passion, and he wants you to come along with him to explore the yesteryear of the gridiron. So hop on board his DeLorean and let's get this baby up to 88 miles per hour.
Great Scott!
This time to step up the DeLorean, the date is September 5th, 1906, and we're in the stands at a college football game, opening day between St. Louis and Carroll College. We're excited because we kind of heard something, a little bit of a buzz about this foreign concept that must have been brought down here by some UFOs, because it doesn't make any sense here down on the States. There were some whisperings of Teddy Roosevelt getting together with a bunch of dudes to try to, we'll call it, wussify our game here that we love and cherish so much. I mean, come on, what's next? We quit keeping score and everybody gets a trophy for just showing up? Oh, sorry about that. Maybe that's kind of my 1906 brain mixed with my 2022 brain a little bit there. But seriously, I'm sure there were these types of conversations in the stands, because on March 31st, 1906, the Intercollegiate Athletic Association of the United States was founded, later to have its name changed to what we know it as today, the NCAA. I mean, we've talked about this before, but the NCAA was essentially founded to create rules to protect student athletes from being injured and even killed on the field of sporting events. And of course, football was at the top of the hit list for it. I mean, one of the biggest points of discussion revolved around this week's topic. To throw or not to throw? That is a question. We go forward with the forward pass or go backwards and get shut down? I mean, this is like no BS here, because there were talks of making the sport of football illegal. Zilch, nada. We got to talk about Al Capone maybe having football games back in the yard where he's slinging his moonshine. And yes, that uber gigantic, multi-mega billion-dollar industry that is the NFL and NCAA football, not to mention all of the high school and younger kids across the nation, would not be in existence as it is today. And why not? I mean, parents didn't want to see their kids get killed. Something had to be done. And one solution happened to involve the forward pass, which officially would be legalized for the 1906 season. And here on September 5th of that 1906 season, we get to witness the first legalized forward pass. Bradbury Robinson launched the ball down the field, and it hit the ground. So it maybe not as climatic as you would like to expect. However, it hits the ground, but it didn't touch anybody. So it resulted in a turnover, and the rest was history. Whoa, wait a minute. Turnover? That should be an incompleted pass, right? He threw the ball, it didn't touch anybody, it just touched the ground. Okay, just got incompleted pass, go back to the huddle, throw another one, or run down the throat of your opponent. I mean, it was a little bit different back then. First time ever having forward passes, so they had some different kind of, what we'll call maybe funny rules. But hey, we all think they're funny till they're not, right? Because this is one of those linchpin moments in football that ultimately led to domination and truly becoming America's number one sport, plus maybe number 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, because it is just purely that massive. Although, of course, I mean, we know it would take a while. This is 1906 we're talking. The NFL is not even in existence, and we don't have the greatest game ever played in 1958 or any of those other types of things. But in this week's episode, we're going to talk about many of the individuals that contributed to this notion of turning some 3 yards in a cloud of dust into the aerial attack that we all know and love for our fantasy football teams. We're here to talk with Michael Mertes about his ongoing passion project called the Quarterback Project. Something he started to try to rank the best QBs of all time. Which, I guess you could say many people have done that. You could probably type in the little Google machine right now. You put 10 best quarterbacks, you'll have like the GOAT, Tom Brady. No, it's Johnny Unitas. No, maybe it's Peyton Manning. He can squeak in there a little bit, and it's all these other types of things. But basically, it's dang near impossible. And Michael realized that. So what he tried to do is account for, differences across decades, across time that would be having different types of play in the NFL, statistics, and there's a lot of other things that he has that kind of played into this QB ranking index that he gives for the Quarterback Project. And we'll get into that more. But first, I got to tell you about this week's sponsor. We here at the Sports History Network are proud to announce that we have a partnership with Home Field Apparel, which is a premium college apparel brand out of Indianapolis that provides incredibly comfortable, officially licensed apparel with vintage college designs. They have over 150 colleges available and always are adding more. But these are not your run-of-the-mill college shirts if you pick up at the stadium, you know what I mean? No way, dude. Home Field digs through the archives and history of your school to find unique logos, mascots, and moments to make thoughtful designs for your school. And speaking of the Quarterback Project, we'll find out about a countdown on the top 100, and we'll find out about a countdown of the top 100 from Michael in this episode. Where will TB12 wind up? I don't know, but my money is he's probably near the top. And guess what school he's from? The Maize and Blue, baby. So what I had to do is got to get this shirt from Home Field. They sent this shirt. Let me dig over here. Let me pull it up. You can't see this because this is an audio podcast, but as I pull this out here, it's a gray shirt. I open it up. It's actually, you expect to get a shirt, right? You get this cool shirt. You just want to present your logo and everything like that. You're fandom for the team. But I'm looking this it's like this reinforced neck. I don't know what this little stitching thing is. I'm no stitching guru or anything like that, but like I was impressed. I was actually surprised. I thought I was just gonna get a run-of-the-mill shirt, comfy, good quality, all that type of stuff. I got this University of Michigan has got this Wolverine with like a sailor's hat, and it says it's great to be a Wolverine. Didn't even know it existed. But again, it's something that, like I said, way better than I could have even imagined. I'm glad that they're a sponsor of us, and I'm excited to have this partnership with Home Field Apparel. I mean, just go back to the shirt though. I'm just telling you. Here's a true endorsement from the football history dude. This thing is so nice, I'm not even going to cut the sleeves off. I'm going to leave it there, as is. And if you want to be like me and support your school from a historical perspective, head over to homefieldapparel.com right now and use the code SPORTSHISTORY at checkout so you can get 15% off your first order. Again, that's promo code SPORTSHISTORY at checkout for 15% off your order at homefieldapparel.com. I'll even go ahead and wait for a few seconds for you. Pause this episode right now, head right over there, pick out your favorite shirt. And ba-bam! Boom! Now that you placed your order, let's get into this interview with Michael about the Quarterback Project. Let's go here. Let's first tell the listener of the podcast right now, let's tell them about your website, the Quarterback Project, what the origin story is, and basically why you keep going with it.
Sure. I never meant this when I started doing this to be a website or a blog. I never even meant to share it with anybody, really. It was something that around the time of the 100th anniversary of the NFL, the 2019 season, I started to think back when in high school, and I would come home, and on ESPN they'd be showing a lot of NFL films, especially the Super Bowl memories. And so that introduced me to your Fran Tarkentons of the world and your Len Dawsons and your Roger Staubachs, guys who had maybe heard of, but actually could see the highlights of them play, and kind of a neat nostalgic thing. And it was always something back in high school I was kind of curious about. And of course, now here we are decades later, and it hits me again, and it just kind of became a hobby that I do kind of in the evenings after work, basically trying to create this formula. Instead of arbitrarily ranking the greatest quarterbacks of all time, like you would like any list, right? What are the greatest albums of all time? What are the greatest movies of all time? Try to actually come up with a numerical way to determine who is the best of all time, and like maybe who was really better, Elway versus Marino, Unitas versus Montana, that trying to put those debates up too. So when I finally did the calculations and was comfortable with the formula, I'm like, well, now I've done it and I've humored myself. What do I do with all this data now? And I thought, okay, I'll create a blog. I'd done it, a different kind of blog years ago. And if people like it, great. And if people don't, I've kind of left my fingerprints on the internet, I suppose. And so that's really how it kind of came to fruition. I needed a name. I thought the Quarterback Project was kind of cool because it was, and now still is, an ongoing project 3 years later. And it's just been kind of a lot of fun tweaking things as we go along and learning more about the history of the game. I'm not a statistician. I guess I'm like you. I'm a football history dude, even though you're the football history dude. I just try to do my best to put something on paper that actually has some weight to it, other than this is just my opinion.
Actually, that was one of the questions I was going to ask you. Like, why you? Are you qualified as like a statistician, or just like you just said, you're just a dude that loves football history? It sounds like.
That's it. I tried to use the little statistical knowledge I learned in high school and college to try and do something that at least was somewhat legitimate. But otherwise, yeah, it's more of just a curiosity thing, unless I'm not approved by any sort of organization or entity that qualifies me as a statistician. I'm just a fan of the game.
So the index score that you have, that you give to him, like for instance, I'm on the 100 greatest quarterbacks page right here. It looks like you're down to number 26. Is that listed somewhere on the site, the actual formula that you were talking about?
There is an about page, which kind of alludes to how it's created. I'm more of a visual than an audio person, so I could literally spend the next 45 minutes telling you how I came up with this formula, but I won't waste yours or your listeners' times. It's the index score is the numeric value I give to the quarterback's career that basically determines who's better than who. A 4.0 is higher than a 3.8, which is higher than a 3.5. And there's really three primary things that go into determining that index score. First thing is I compare the players on 8 categories to the average quarterback of their era. The closest thing I can think of is like WAR in baseball, wins above replacement. It's kind of like that, but it's not a cumulative thing over their career. It's more of an average. And so I use those 8 categories, basically take what their career number was compared to that average number, and it churns out a number. And so I cumulatively add those, both regular season and postseason, and that's sort of like a base index score. And then I add 2 more, I'll call them bonuses, that I felt were important to kind of go beyond just the statistical value. The first is what I call longevity. How long were they their respective team's starting quarterback? A guy who played for 12 years as a starting quarterback is going to earn a bigger longevity bonus than a guy who played for 7 in most cases. And it's based upon the average longevity of the average quarterback while they played. And then, of course, the other thing is winning a championship. I gave bonuses for that. And I gave bonuses for maybe players who were part of that Super Bowl champion team and started games, but didn't play in the Super Bowl themselves. The best example I can think of is that 90s Giants team that won Super Bowl 25. There's sort of almost a 50-50 split that I gave that bonus to both Hostetler and Sims, because Sims won 11 games for that team, and I didn't want to not acknowledge the fact that he helped them get to that point. So that's kind of how I did it. Those 3 things combine into an index score, and that's basically how you've got your who's the better player, historically speaking.
So maybe this is kind of more nuanced, or I'm in the weeds here, but you mentioned that if they're starting quarterback with a particular team for so long. I mean, we talked about this at the beginning. So my buddy, my guy, Matt Stafford, right? So he moves to another team, but then he wins a Super Bowl there, or like Kurt Warner, Brady, Manning. Like, how would that play into effect?
In terms of longevity, or in terms of them going to a different team?
You said starting with a team. Do you mean just starting period, or do you mean with a particular team?
I gotcha. Oh, that's the good question. I determined their longevity. They had to have started at least half of their respective teams' games in a given season. So, like, for example, I think I determined that Peyton Manning was his team's primary starter for 17 of his 18 years. He missed that 1 year because of injury, but I didn't give him that extra year because he didn't actually play, or he wasn't his team's primary starter. So that's how it factors into what qualifies them as their team's primary starter.
Okay, that makes sense. Again, it's the primary starter regardless of the team or something
Correct.
like that. Okay.
Exactly.
I was wondering if maybe when they jumped, whether it was through free agency, that's a different story. But like if they get traded, it's like the team doesn't essentially value them as much, like say a Stafford, but that was for different reasons. If like that dinged them a little bit.
Right. Not at all. No, it would be, I guess Peyton Manning's run would have been the number of years he was the primary starter for the Colts plus the number of years he was the primary starter for Denver.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, he was the first quarterback. I mean, I have to double check, but he's the first one to ever win 2 Super Bowls with different teams, right? Being the starter for both. Yeah,
I think he is. There's obviously been a few guys who have, and now of course Brady. Well, Brady's won with the Patriots and the Bucs, and there have been other guys who've played multiple Super Bowls with different teams. I think Craig Morton was the first one back with the Cowboys and then the Broncos. But I think Manning was the first one to win Super Bowls with two different franchises.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was the first winning, and then Brady's the only other one as far as I know. But I mean, you just went way back there. So Craig Morton, how do you kind of alluded to it, like the whole, how do I account for quarterbacks in different eras? But can you maybe break that down a little bit more?
Yeah, of course I will. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. If we go by the cumulative numbers, your guys who played quarterback in the 60s, 70s, and even 80s don't compare to the guys now. Your Jay Cutlers of the world, if you go by the cumulative numbers, are going to be one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. And as a longtime Bears fan, I should probably be careful what I say, but he's not one of the greats. Although I shouldn't talk, the Bears haven't had a lot of great quarterbacks, so maybe I shouldn't be an expert in this field. But in terms of was the question like, was there impact on different teams? Forgive me, I can't remember what the exact question was.
This one is more so the question of like, if there's, you pointed out, Jay Cutler's going to have, also, he's got these great stats. He's going to be a whiny face going off the court, but like generation or era to era.
I gotcha, right. So how do you compare Jay Cutler to Fran Tarkenton to a guy like Norm Van Brocklin, right, who played in completely different eras, completely different styles of play, completely different emphasis on passing versus running. So what I did, like, for example, you can't compare Fran Tarkenton to Steve Young, but what I did was I took the year by year, the average quarterback stats for every single year since 1950. And now Fran Tarkenton played from 61 to 78. So basically what he's being compared to is, what were the average quarterback statistics cumulatively from 61 to 78? And then how does he compare? How was his career completion percentage compared to every single primary starting quarterback's average completion percentage from 61 to 78, the years he played? For Steve Young, it would be between 85 and 99 when he played. So you don't compare players to statistics that happened before or after them. It had to have been from the first year they threw an NFL pass, or AFL in that situation, to the very last season they threw a pass. And it's within that parameter.
How do you have this all? Is it like some spreadsheets upon spreadsheets? And then how do you compare, like, to pull out specific year by year like that you just said?
Spreadsheets upon spreadsheets upon spreadsheets. You're 100% right. It's the source, the probably 99% of the data I get is from profootballreference.com. If you're a football stats nerd, it's heaven for you. And so I basically plucked the information from that. In 1973, what was the average passing yardage per game? What were the average touchdowns per pass attempt? What was the average completion percentage? And so basically compiled that into a spreadsheet, and then again took the average and then went year by year as to how each player compiled their stats, and then came up with, I'll call it like a deviation. It's not exactly standard deviation, but you would get, like, for example, I think Troy Aikman's career completion percentage is 61.5%, but the years he played, the average quarterbacks was like 57.9. So what's the deviation between his completion percentage and the average quarterbacks? And that goes into the index score. So that's it. You can't really compare era to era or players from different eras, because it's just a completely different game. Every 5 to 10 years, it's a completely different game.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's just even something that everybody in the fantasy football world is right now drafting. I mean, even that changes. You're talking about now we have so many different mobile quarterbacks as opposed to pocket passers and everything.
Exactly. And that's something I tried to account for. In the 8 categories I used, maybe I'll just go over them really quickly. I went over career win-loss percentage, total yards per game, total touchdowns per game, and total fumbles plus interceptions per game, so total turnovers. The other 4 stats I did were completion percentage, touchdowns per pass attempt, interceptions per pass attempt, and then I couldn't decide between yards per attempt or yards per completion, so I just took the average of the 2 of those. And I felt like it gave me a nice balance between 4 categories that are per game versus 4 categories that are per pass attempt, and then also, too, looking at incorporating 4 statistics that incorporate rushing, and then 4 statistics that are just exclusive to passing, which is primarily how the quarterback moves the ball downfield, but also incorporating statistics that don't punish a guy who ran for a lot of yards in his career, going back to Tobin Rote in the 50s to Donovan McNabb in the 2000s or Randall Cunningham's. So I felt that was important to incorporate too.
Yeah, I mean, just going through this whole list, you must have learned so much about different quarterbacks and the history of the game just by digging into the box scores.
And it was fun learning about guys who I'd maybe heard of and didn't know a lot about, and then the occasional quarterback who I had never heard of before that maybe got up on that list and was interested in learning about them. The best example I can think of is there was a quarterback in the 60s for the Browns named Frank Ryan. He ended up number 36 on my list. He was a guy I'd never heard of. He was kind of a nice little wedged in between, your Otto Graham era and then maybe your 70s with Brian Sipe and then into the 80s and Bernie Kosar. He's the last Browns quarterback to lead them to a championship. Back in 64, the Browns shut out the Baltimore Colts and Johnny Unitas, and was kind of a big upset for its time. And Frank Ryan, interesting learning about him too, is the summer in between that 64 championship game and the 65 season, he finished his PhD from Rice University in mathematics. So I think he might have been the first quarterback he should have had Dr. Ryan on the back of his jersey is what he should have had. But interesting guy to read about who I hadn't learned much and had a career that just about any other quarterback would have killed to have had. And so that was fun learning about guys like him that I didn't really know about.
I was going to say, so going through, I saw like the bios of many different quarterbacks on, like you have a quarterback bio page, for instance. So do you is it everybody that you put on this list, even if they're not on this 100 list, then they get their own little bio too?
Exactly. I did bios for every quarterback that I analyzed, which was about 155 quarterbacks. So obviously there's 55 guys who didn't make that top 100 list. But I thought I was going to be done when I first released the top 100 list 3 years ago and did the bios for those top 100 guys. And I guess I just felt some sort of internal pressure, just desire to kind of keep going. And I'm like, well, I'm going to write about these other guys then, who played enough seasons to qualify for the list, but weren't good enough to crack the top 100, or in some cases weren't even anywhere close to the top 100. And I just kind of added to that. So even though the top 100 guys in their bios are on my top 100 page, the quarterback bio page is inclusive of everybody else that I analyzed.
So I saw that for Bill Kenny, you gave him bonus points for a sweet mustache. I mean, how many bonus points we're talking here?
I did. It's sort of a metaphorical bonus point, I guess. If I can, I'll tell you what. At some point, maybe I'll come out with the top 10 mustachioed quarterbacks of all time. He'll probably be pretty high on that list. He had a solid one. But in terms of the index score, I didn't add anything to his score. No, he didn't quite get anything bonus for that. Yeah.
Yeah, I imagine, or some of the other different personalities you've had throughout the years and stuff, and the Sablers and all that kind of thing, that could be something. So speaking of that, going back to the list then, so I mean, like right now, I see that you're at number 26, as far as, because you're leading up to, what is it? So you're leading up to kickoff of this season for announcing your number one, right?
That's right. Every day on my Twitter account, I'm releasing the next quarterback closest to number one, and I'll get to number one on opening kickoff night of the NFL season this year. Yeah.
I wonder if that one guy that's going to be playing is going to end up showing up on your list, because he doesn't have a longevity, does not have a long career, but he's definitely right now one of the better ones in the league.
Well, you'll have to stay tuned.
Yeah. Stay tuned, stick it out. Yeah, I'm curious to see how much it's going to factor in some of these guys that are like, the Mahomes and the what's his name? Josh. I just said his name, Josh Allen. I guess I could probably cheat by seeing if you have a bio, I guess.
Yeah. I'll tell you what. Here my qualifying factor to be analyzed for the list was you had to have been your team's primary starter for at least 5 seasons. And I believe both Mahomes and Josh Allen are going into year 5 right now. So as long as those two guys make 9 starts this year, they will both qualify for the list next year. And although they're not on the list now, there's a good chance they're both going to pop up on the list next year if they make it to that.
Hey, you led me into a question I was going to ask later on. Is this something that you feel like you're going to every year create the list again?
I guess as long as people are interested in that happening. I don't know if I'll do every year a countdown again. It's a lot of work, but I will definitely continue to update that top 100 list at the end of every single season, and include who jumped on it. A guy who jumped on this past year because he made his fifth season as a primary starter was Dak Prescott. He managed to jump into the top 100 list this year because he had enough years to qualify and had the stats to do it as well, too. And then the other thing that I kind of do is it's a living, breathing sort of thing. Like, once you make the list, you're not necessarily locked in there. If Dak Prescott plays 3 more seasons and is awful, he can fall. He could potentially fall out of the top 100. So there's no sort of security once you get to a certain point that you're going to stay at that point.
Yeah, and then for that's the only tough part about it. The guys that are on the list and they're already retired, only way they can get higher is if other people fall below them.
That's pretty much true, unless, I don't know, some of these guys, maybe if they want to strap it up again and see if they can get back into it, but probably for the most part, they're going to be reliant on guys ahead of them falling down. They're probably not going to go anywhere, yeah.
Well, we talked about Barry Sanders in the pregame, but yeah, that guy can strap it up, and I still think he could hang with a lot of the guys in the league, even in his 50s or whatever it is.
I wouldn't be surprised. That guy, I feel like the way he played had given himself a lot of mileage left in the tank, and so it's a shame that he ended it when he did, and obviously I think 30 for 30 did a documentary on him, which all of those are great. But yeah, I got a feeling if you could probably put him out there, and he'd probably be able to definitely hang in there for a few plays, I bet.
Yeah, I mean, again, we're talking 50s or however old he is. Right. I'd have to go back and look at it. But all right, how about this? What's the quarterback that ranked, I guess you could say, higher on the list than you expected, and you're like, man, I got to double check this. I didn't, made you rethink their career?
I'd say double check. The guy who I probably quintuple checked, because I'm like, no way, no. Every time I looked at the numbers, Jeff Garcia cracked my top 50. And now Jeff Garcia, I think anybody who watched football was like, okay, he was good. I mean, he had a few great years there. His, in 2000 and 2001, he scored 72 touchdowns combined, passing and rushing, which was the most in the NFL. The second place guy was Peyton Manning, and he only had 64. So you can make that argument then. In those 2 years, Jeff Garcia is arguably the best quarterback in the NFL for 2 years. And I had to look back for his 10 years he played. He was in the top 10 in passer rating 5 of those years, and in the top 5 in 3 of those years. So he kind of, I guess I can't say under the radar. His relationship with Terrell Owens was much publicized, obviously, at its time. Yeah, but he was a guy who, I mentioned the 8 categories, he basically did everything better than the average quarterback for the 10 years he played. The 2 that were exceptions were win-loss percentage and yards by completion and attempt. And even then, he was like dead on average for those 2. But he, I was just like, I could see him being in the top 100. No way he's in the top 50. But every time I looked at the numbers, he squeezed in there. So, yeah, way to go, Jeff. You had a great career, and people should acknowledge that for you. So nicely done.
Well, I mean, you helped acknowledge it because of through this, and it's something that there's other players on this list. I'm like, okay, 94, David Garrard. I'm like, wait a second, he had a cup of coffee with the Jaguars, but I'm sure there's a reason because of the way that it boiled down. How about the flip side? The player that you felt either should have been, just based on like what they mean to their team and ultimately victories, but should have been higher on the index score or, by your heart, or just didn't make it at all?
The one, I'm probably anybody who was willing to check out my website or Twitter account, I'm about to lose by saying this, but a guy who did not make the top 100 that kind of blew my mind was Cam Newton. And I mean, here's a former NFL MVP, former Rookie of the Year, and he's another guy. Him and Jeff Garcia were the 2 guys whose statistics I had to check the most. He only had 2 years where his passer rating was above 90. And of course, one of those was the year that he won the MVP. But otherwise, looking at his statistics, other than yards, he was really kind of an average to below average quarterback throughout his career. But I feel like he was such a dynamic player, a guy you kind of just had to watch and would do incredible things with the football. It's almost like the mythos of Cam Newton is bigger than the numbers he produced. But I think that said too, his last few years have really not been kind to him. He's really been kind of poor and at the bottom of the list of passer ratings. And I mean, he really struggled coming back last year with Carolina. New England was not a very good year for him as well either. And that's another thing too that I have to take into account is you have to look at the quarterback's complete body of work. I'm not saying what are their best 7 years, right? Or what's their best 5-year period. I've got to look at the good, the bad, and the ugly of rookie year till the last pass that they threw. The guy who, mythologically speaking to me, is the greatest quarterback of all time is Johnny Unitas, because he has that sort of larger than life, the guy who sort of helped football get out of the Stone Age and become America's sport. But I can't ignore his last couple of years with the Colts and that last year with the Chargers. He'd probably have a higher index score and end up being higher on the list than he is. Wink, wink, he's not number one. Perhaps had he just called it a day after Super Bowl V and walked off a winner. So you have to take warts and all and look at their complete body of work. And Cam Newton was one of those guys who's really had more average to below average seasons than seasons I'd say that are good, let alone great.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be a perfect one because when he was on the field, he did make a difference. But then again, how many seasons really did he do that for? And I'm just crashing back in my head. I know he had like one of the greatest rookie seasons of all time, and then from there. But I'm thinking more from his legs than his pass.
Yeah, and that's the unfortunate thing. Although certainly his legs have helped him too. Obviously, if he didn't have that element, well, it probably, we wouldn't be talking about him now. But that helped make him an MVP one year and a Rookie of the Year. So he certainly had an impact on the game, and maybe he'll have a bounce back. He's even signed with anybody. I didn't even think to look that up coming in.
Yeah, I don't think so. If there's an injury, maybe he'll come out, but I don't know if he might be done.
He might be done, or who knows? Maybe he's listening to your podcast And he's going to be like, I'm going to show that quarterback guy wrong and then have an MVP season and jump into the top 100. So, Cam, if you're listening, prove me wrong. Yeah.
Maybe over with Chicago, because we'll see if your guy's going to do anything, we'll see.
Justin's got a patchwork team to work with this year, so maybe he could use some mentoring from a guy like Cam Newton for how to deal with something like this, because it's probably going to be a long year in the Windy City football-wise, long season.
Right, yeah. No, I mean, they're almost somewhat kind of comparable in their style of play. So, yeah, someone mentoring from that perspective. I mean, Fields has, from what I understand, better he's got a better ball, though. Even not just the deep ball that Cam had, but he has some kind of accuracy, doesn't he?
Yeah, he's a complete player. It's just the question is, are we going to get to see that, or is he going to get sacked 7 times a game? That's I think the fear is just he's just going to get the snot beaten out of him this year. Hopefully he doesn't. Hopefully he perseveres through that.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll let Hutchinson break the single game rookie sack record against him, and then after that, you guys can do all right. So that's fine. But here's the time of the show. We're gonna bring out the DeLorean, right?
Yeah.
You get to go back in time. You're stealing my keys, and you get to go. So I'm trying to figure out the best way to go. Let's head back to some of the great quarterback duels that nobody remembers. Maybe like a duel that stuck out to you.
I'll tell you what, I've got a couple in mind. One that I would have loved to have seen, especially too because there's a little bit of weight to the story. Week 3, 1986. And it's Dan Marino and the Dolphins are visiting Ken O'Brien and the Jets. And why that's important is because obviously at this point Marino's established. He's debatably, with Joe Montana, the best quarterback in the game. And of course, Ken O'Brien is really famous for one thing, being the guy who the Jets drafted instead of Dan Marino in 83. So obviously O'Brien has something to prove. And in this game, Marino throws for 448 yards and 6 touchdowns. And the Dolphins are going to win. At the last minute, the last second, O'Brien throws a touchdown pass to put the game in overtime, and then throws a game-winning touchdown pass to beat Marino 51-45. And he ends up on the day with 4 touchdowns and like 477 yards passing. And sort of one of the, all right, I'll always be the guy who is looked at as, oh, we could have had Dan Marino instead we got Ken O'Brien. But he'll always have that day. And he snuck in my top 100 list as well, too. He's a 2-time Pro Bowler. Ken O'Brien was no schlub. He just unfortunately has that designation to him. I want to go a little bit further back to a weird game in Dan Marino's career, especially because it was his first pro start. So this is week 6 of the 83 season. The Dolphins are the defending AFC champs, and they got to draft Marino because he was the second to last pick in the first round. And they're starting David Woodley, who had been their quarterback in the Super Bowl the previous year. Woodley's struggling. And through 5 weeks, the Dolphins have now dropped 2 of 3, and they're 3-2. So Shula goes with Marino. This is week 6. This is his first career start. And he's going up against the Buffalo Bills. And a veteran by the name of Joe Ferguson, who he's been in the league for 10 years. He's coming off uncategorically the worst season of his career. The Bills had drafted his replacement, Jim Kelly, but Jim Kelly gave the Bills the middle finger and went to go play for Houston in the USFL. So Marino in the game throws for like 373 yards, 3 touchdowns, a couple picks, but basically puts the Dolphins in winning position. Joe Ferguson, never before or never since, threw for more than 370 yards in his career in a single game. He goes for 417 and 5 touchdowns. And the Bills beat the Dolphins in overtime to go to 4-2 and send the Dolphins down to 3-3. That ended up being the pinnacle of Ferguson's career. The Bills ended up going 8-8. The Dolphins went 12-4 and made the postseason. Ferguson, sadly, is most famous probably for getting knocked unconscious by Wilbur Marshall of the 85 Bears in one game when he was actually playing for the Lions. But he ended up playing 5 more years after that. So he's a guy who didn't make the top 100 list, but I thought that was kind of cool how in Marino's first career start, he gets out-dueled by this 11-year-old veteran who time has apparently passed by. The one other game that I would have loved to have been at, wild card round, 2009 season, but January 2010, and it's the Green Bay Packers at the Arizona Cardinals. And it is the year after the Cardinals went to the Super Bowl and lost to Pittsburgh. It's Aaron Rodgers' first career playoff start. And Kurt Warner, it ends up being his last career playoff victory, because the following week the Cardinals lose to the Saints and the Saints go and win the Super Bowl. Warner retires. So Warner throws for over 370 in that game. Rodgers goes for over 400. Both of them score 5 touchdowns. And the irony of all that, and the great game that Rodgers had, is that the game was basically decided on 2 plays. The very first offensive play of the game, when Rodgers threw his lone interception of the game. And then the very last play, which was in overtime, when Rodgers got sacked and fumbled it, and the Cardinals ran it in for a touchdown. So 10 offensive touchdowns that game, and it was 151-45 on a defensive fumble recovery. But I think that would have been a fun shootout to watch. And also, too, a huge Kurt Warner guy. Always loved him. And, of course, as a Bears fan, you know, the negatory in me, I guess, says maybe it would have been fun to watch the Packers lose, too, in a playoff game.
Yeah, I mean, you got to get out there and see some of those. I mean, I'm just thinking of some of the guys like Ryan Fitzpatrick jumped in my mind as when you talked about like the old timer come in and out of nowhere. And I mean, did you even have profile him? I mean, he was just a journeyman, really.
So Fitzpatrick, he qualified. I know he just retired. So some point this year during the football season, I'll write his bio and we'll see if maybe he squeaks into the top 100 or not. No spoilers, but yeah, I'll write up a article about Fitzpatrick. It'll probably be a good one too. We had a kind of a colorful career and definitely had a lot of different apartments over his NFL career too.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, his address changed so much. I mean, they don't even bother keeping a permanent residence, but just a fun guy to have. And there was a one point when they talked about him coming to Detroit, I'm like, you know what? We're rebuilding. It'd just be fun to have him and watch him play every week in the pressers and everything.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, he was a fun one to watch. So he'll be missed. I know that.
So, I mean, you talk about getting this 100 list updated, maybe refreshed here and there, but do you have any plans of other positions besides a quarterback in the future?
Every once in a while, I'm like, that'd be cool to do top running backs or top receivers or even like baseball, doing the top starting pitchers of all time or the top hitters of all time. You know, though I've spent so much time on this quarterback project the past 3 years and I'm still spending a lot of time on it. Let's maybe at some point I'll hang it up and do something else. But for now, I think that's kind of the project that's taken up the bulk of my time.
I wonder if, now, I mean, I don't know that maybe as many nuances. So baseball, for instance, pitching, it seems like that would be easier in my mind for the most part to compare eras to eras because it's throwing a ball and hitting a ball. But I mean, I get there's some different kind of strategies involved.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, and of course you've got the live ball and the dead ball eras, and that you'd have to, take a look at. One guy, 1 year his ERA 3.5 might be outstanding, and in another era that's not very good. So, we'll see if maybe that's the next one I spill over into.
Well, maybe that might be a premonition for the listener of the show. Speaking of listener of the show, where can they find your work if they're interested?
All right. So it's quarterbackproject.wordpress.com. That's where you could find me on the web. On Twitter, I am at QB Project Blog. So quarterbackproject.wordpress.com and at QB Project Blog on Twitter.
All right, perfect. And as before we go here, any last words of gridiron knowledge nuggets from through the lens of the Quarterback Project for the listener of the show?
I guess if you're a student of history, history is always being made. So I'm curious as to what the 2022 season has in store for us and what that's going to do for my site coming up in this next year. So I'm excited about that. Let's see what happens.
There you go. At the time of recording this intro, outro type of number for you, I see that he's at quarterback number 22 on the list. Troy Aikman just went off the board at number 23, and now at 22 we have Norm Van Brocklin. So who's going to be at the top 20 going off the board? Think you can guess? Well, how about this? I'll tell you what. Send us over the top 10 of your guess in order over on the contact page at the SHN website. before Saturday, August 27th, because of course, we can't have you send them in after the fact, after it's already posted. But if you do this before August 27th and you guess the top 10 correct, well, I'll go ahead and give you a gift card to the Sports History Network shop. That's where you can go ahead and get swag for your favorite podcast. Maybe get a Football History Dude t-shirt, got me popping my arm out that DeLorean. You and me got to go back in time. We're going to learn about the history of the gridiron together. You could tell all your friends about it. And the way to do that is to head to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, give me your top 10 guess. Again, if you have, by Saturday, August 27th, the right 10 in a row, you're going to get a gift card. So good luck with guessing the top 10. Until next time, dude, I'm through if you're through.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Football History Dude. To make sure you're the first to get the next episode, please subscribe on your podcast player of choice and head on over to thefootballhistorydude.com for the show notes and more information on the history of the NFL. And remember, dudes, where we're going, we don't need roads.
Put up my replica 1909 World Series program poster from Row 1 brand, and that's all it took for Marla to do a complete redesign of the Guardian offices, doing up the walls with tremendous prints from baseball, football, basketball, hockey, and more sports events. And every one of them can't help but trigger memories of sports yesteryear.
And here's the last one. Let's put it up here by your desk. Perfect.
Ah, that's a nice one. College football, 1923, Navy versus Penn State. Do you remember that game, Marla?
I sure do. It was October 20th, 1923. Cloudy, but a reasonable 57 degrees at the 2:30 kickoff time. Over 20,000 turned out at Beaver Field in College Station, Pennsylvania for this clash of two of the nation's top teams. The Nittany Lions were the underdogs, despite having won their first 3 games by a combined score of 94-0. The heavy favorites were the Midshipmen, who went on to play in the Rose Bowl after the season.
Right, and the game immediately became...
The entire color of the game would ultimately be dominated by Penn State's star halfback Harry Wilson, but both offenses took some time to get going for a good 22 minutes before Wilson got the crowd to their feet with an interception of Bill McKee's forward pass, returning it all the way for his first touchdown of the day.
Wilson certainly was great
on the next kickoff. Who would end up as returner but Harry Wilson? Wilson dodged at least a half dozen.
Recall the greatest moments in sports history, or just your own personal favorites, with Row 1 brand sports paraphernalia. Don't delay. Visit today at sportshistorynetwork.com/Row1. That's ROW1 today for access to the full Row 1 catalog of gallery prints and gifts like t-shirts, long sleeve shirts, telephone cases, coffee mugs, blankets, pillows, towels, and even shower curtains. Act today for a 15% discount off all prints with coupon code SHN15 and 20% off all other items with coupon code SHN20 at checkout. And keep your dial locked to the Sports History Network for the exciting chronicles of the 1920 sports world in Orville, Mulligan. Sports Strike, coming soon.
The score remained Penn State 14, Navy 0. The second half had barely begun when Harry Wilson and Penn State went on to work on Navy again.